Welcome to Untangled, a Usability Sciences podcast where we help product owners and product managers build better products. Hello, I'm Peter Welpton, VP of Sales, and this is Adrienne Guillory, Chief Operating Officer. Welcome back to episode 3. Is that not right? Chief Operating Officer? Did I say that wrong? COO. How about that?
It's the same thing. All the same things. All the same things.
Thanks for doing this again.
Absolutely.
All right.
To be here.
I have a lot of things I want to get into. I think the theme of this particular episode is going to be about concept testing and piloting, but I'll explain why here in a little bit. And I want to start off with some stuff that I've read online and to get your thoughts on. Some of this stuff I've shared and some of that I hadn't. And the first part is this report that came out from the FTC. Government's always looking at stuff, trying to tell you what we're doing right and wrong. And they did this research study of looking at hundreds of websites. And the results came back that 76% of these websites have at least one thing that they called dark patterns, which in my world is just tricking users into doing things they don't know what they're doing, right? Is that the best way to say it?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
And so, and the examples of this are opting people into services that maybe they didn't want to be in, and to get out of it, they have to manually opt out, or driving them into a purchase decision they didn't mean to make.
Yep.
And so the question I had for you, I was thinking about is, these all feel very nefarious and kind of dastardly, but as a designer and in terms of user experience, is there a way that these same practices could be done honestly and you could drive customers towards making the same decision you want them to make without tricking them into doing it?
Theoretically, yes, but I wholeheartedly believe they chose that for a reason. So whatever they wanted you to do, so whether it was, I want you to buy this thing, I want you to subscribe, I want you to give me your whole list of contacts so I can now spam them. If they had asked you directly, you would have said absolutely not. If they wanted to make it easy to unsubscribe or to cancel a subscription, they could. They chose not to do that. So could they be more honest and less shady? Absolutely, right? So just do it the right way, right? Like, it's not hard. An unsubscribe button should be easy to find. A cancellation button should be in your accounts. It should be, don't add in things into my shopping cart that I myself didn't put there. Don't tell me it's a special offer and then make it a subscription. Like, they made a decision to do those things.
And ultimately, when users find out that you've tricked them into doing these things, the end result is never good.
No, this is why people are on Better Business Bureau complaining. This is why they're on Reddit complaining. This is why they're doing shout outs on Instagram and Facebook about how this company won't let me do this thing, or they tricked me. This is where lawsuits are coming from. And then even more recently, this is why people are being fined, because companies are choosing to be shady. They're choosing to more or less steal. They're stealing your data, they're stealing your money, they're stealing your time, whatever the case may be. This is why you're starting to see more of that.
Which leads me into the next article I read, which is sometimes user experiences or the purchase process for a customer becomes a problem for reasons that are out of the company's control. And in this particular article, it was about how recently food delivery apps, Uber Eats, DoorDash, have had a real problem in New York City because minimum wages have increased so dramatically that the costs have gone out of control. And so usage has dropped off, affecting both the delivery service and ultimately the restaurants that use them to deliver the food. And that led me to wonder, is there a function of asking questions to the users or communicating better to the customer why these cost increases have happened? Is there anything that they can do to help affect usages that way?
So I want to decouple kind of the question, because I don't want you to think based on my answer that changing or updating the messaging or even doing messaging testing is going to keep that from happening, right? So we're talking in some cases, the cost of using Uber has doubled and it was already high. So people are just not doing it because it's expensive, right? I would hope that if they're in an area like New York, that they know that the cost of these things went up because minimum wage went up and now they're giving drivers more money. I would hope that, but that may not always be the case. But from a branding perspective, I think it does make sense to go ahead and have some sort of messaging there that says, hey, we know this is high, but this is why, and there's nothing we can do about it. It's kind of like, hey, the problem's not me, right? But this is what our drivers deserve. So now you know why the cost has gone up. It's not, oh, this is just inflation or they're gouging me. It's not that. It's legally, we now have to pay more money, and it's going to directly show up here.
Ultimately, at some point, cost is the decision maker, the driver of.
I mean, absolutely. When you look at Uber Eats over time, any of the delivery services, that's probably like our number one complaint, right? Because these costs keep going up, but all the costs go up, of course it's going to go up. And it's a deterrent for some people, and that's fine. But from a branding perspective, you should put something in there that says, hey, this line item right here is going directly to people. This is not a business cost. We're giving this to our drivers, right? This is their cost of living.
And then in terms of going back to the previous conversation about dark patterns and trying to trick people into doing things, is there messaging that companies could be doing in terms of testing messaging to try to drive people to these decisions, even if they are, especially if they are things that you do have control over, and trying to get the results that you want out of users?
Absolutely. So I love this particular question because it makes us gives us the opportunity to think about something that doesn't come up enough, which is within user experience, there's a whole field just for content writers. So content writers, UX writers, their sole purpose is to make sure that they communicate or use words that kind of fill in the gaps. So our end users know where to go, they know what to do, it sets expectations, like that is the whole thing. And to be able to do that well, they have to do upfront user research to make sure that they're finding the right words to speak to that audience, right? I've said this before. The words you use on an app designed for my son are going to be very different than the ones designed for me, I would hope, right? Because I don't know half the things my son is talking about most days. But to that point, a content writer would say, okay, well, the concern here might be a trust issue. It might be that, I feel like they're trying to get over. So a content writer is going to make sure they use the words that speak to that issue directly, and put the user at ease. So to make sure that works, we do upfront user testing to figure out what those words should be, and then you can actually test copy. So the same way we do usability testing, hey, let's recruit 8 people, put this brand messaging in front of them and see what their takeaways are. Is this what we want for our brand? Does it answer the question? Which one do we choose?
That leads me into the next article that I actually ended up sharing with you, which was the news that McDonald's was closing down their AI drive-thru locations. And if you haven't seen this is the drive-thru. There is no human being. You just talk into a box. I want this thing on the order, and the machine spits it out. And they were having a lot of problems because the communication was failing between the human and the AI system. The internal systems weren't working great, and people were getting French fried flavored shakes or whatever it was. I was surprised that you actually love this idea of concept testing.
So in my world, it's a concept store or a pilot test, right? So a concept store, I actually fell in love with this a long time ago. So I came to Dallas because I worked for Blockbuster Corporate.
Blockbuster. I remember
many
those.
moons ago. For people who don't know what Blockbuster is, it was a wonderful time on Friday and Saturdays. Big Blue store. But anyway, I came to Dallas to work for them, and my location eventually became a concept store for gaming. So right before the bubble fell out, Blockbuster put a lot of money into like a gaming store. You could go and rent PlayStation games and Xbox games and all that cool stuff, right? It was novel at the time. But a couple of things that we learned is that we never would have gotten out of like research is the craftiness of thieves, right? So I know, right? It was like totally
shoplifting?
Like shoplifting.
Really?
So yeah, so our store became,
I guess that makes sense, yeah.
Our store became like this kind of case study for different types of anti-theft packaging. So we put our games in a certain package and, these super big, bulky locks. And we're like,
you mean like the plastic cases the games
like,
used to come in? They had to,
lock it
okay,
up. Yeah, whole thing, right?
Those, yeah.
And I don't know if this was Blockbuster's initial takeaway, but it was mine, right? Because I'm an assistant store manager. I'm in charge of inventory. So they keep coming up with all these different lock boxes to protect our games. And it never failed. We would go to start cleaning up the store at night, and we're like finding empty boxes. Like, what is this? Like, the locks have been separated. It was madness. So a couple of things that we learned. Magnets affected the locks. Yeah. They were doing some kind of trick with a regular magnet that you could get from Target or Walmart, coming in, unlocking those games and walking out with them. We eventually learned that, like, there was one box, it was super, super sturdy. It's like this super hard plastic. It's like, they're never going to break this open. And they couldn't. But what they did do was bring a blade and slide open like the side of the case, and like push it just enough for the game to come out. And it was just like, this is amazing. I never would have seen this in research. But what it became is, how do the other gaming stores start to protect their equipment? So ours was always like, send it to Plain or Richardson, go send it to Richardson, and let's see how many of their thieves get into it. And if it worked, then it went into the other stores. But one thing that I love about a concept store is, like, even when we're in a room and we're thinking big and we've talked to customers, there are still some elements that you can't plan for, right? I wouldn't have thought that at all. There are other things, like, how does the technology work? Like, can we check in these games the same way we did these other games? What happens on the back end? What happens with the casings in the front? Like, all of these things that we could not have known until we actually put it into a store. So same thing with the McDonald's thing, right? Like, until they got it into a store, who knew that thing could make, French fry flavored milkshakes?
I made that up. I don't think it actually
I know, but it was fun. I was thinking about the Jetsons, like when their machines like haywire and just started shooting out random things. Yeah, same thing. But you wouldn't have known that, right, until you went to that next step. But you can only get there if you put the time in to make sure that you vetted ideas and make sure that you have the right technology for this thing. Like, piloting is a really good idea. Be it a concept store like that. For SaaS, I've seen people figure out, here are 2 or 3 clients that we can implement the full experience into, and let's see what happens. Let's see what the gaps are so that we can fix it. I've seen this a bunch of different ways, and I like them all. They're all great research. And it's amazing what people do, and you won't know until you put it out into the world like that.
This leads us into this idea of concept testing. All of the conversations we were just having about all of those other things leads me to want to learn from you more about when concept testing is appropriate versus maybe the earlier process of just talking to your users to find out what it is you need to concept in the first place. And what is that best process for people?
For a while, I was at a telecom company, and they had us all come in and learn the safe agile flow. So that's agile testing, and what does that look like? And it was new. We were trying design thinking kind of in this space, and I didn't really know where we fit in. So I took the training too, right? So for those of you who do agile, so you have phase 0, which is when the engineering team comes in and starts to architect, what are we going to build, right? They start to think about how big is this thing? They start to scope it out. They start to assign resources, right? Everything I'm talking about happens before that. So pre-phase 0. So early days, depending on how long you're working on this project, the initial starting point should be, who are our users? What do they need? What are their experiences like today? Kind of that generative, kind of exploratory research. We start there. So we get into that space. We understand where their problems are. Then we go in as a team and figure out, what problems do we want to solve? Because all of these problems are not ours to solve, right? So we figure out, what is it that we want to solve? And then the design team comes in and says, okay, well, if this is what we're trying to build out, let's come up with some ideas to get us there. Those ideas are your concepts, right? There should be a direct relation to all of the other stuff you did. So let's come up with some concepts. Let's test them. Let's put them in front of our actual users and make sure they make sense. Sometimes it is a best of breed. So your user may like something from this one, something from this one, and something from this one. Okay, so now I come up with a totally different concept that kind of merges these ideas. So we do that. You finalize that idea, the concept, you write up requirements, and then that's what you hand over at phase 0. So all of that work should happen before your engineering team even gets involved, because it's time consuming. And I've wholeheartedly believe the less rework and trying to build the plane in flight that we can do, the better we are for our engineering team in creating something that's going to be valuable.
I feel like we talk about that a lot, which is this analogy of trying to build the plane in flight. Why is it we struggle to get product owners and companies and brands and so forth to think of it that way?
Because everybody is trying to do everything yesterday. So unless you come into a program where it's net new, then there's already kind of a show in progress. There's already something happening, and people are just trying to add to what's already happening. That could be one reason. Another one could be we had a plan and we had all the things lined out that we wanted to make. We knew exactly what was supposed to happen this year, and then we get a call from the C-suite that's like, psych, we're not doing that. Let's do this instead. So now they're having to play catch up. You have some organizations who don't even know research is a thing. So I was at one company and I was brought in as a researcher and working for product owners, product managers. And this is really when I fell in love with what they do. Because these poor babies, they weren't trained on product. They were the best salesmen. They were the best QA. They were the best developer. And they just kind of inherited that product. They knew nothing about research. They didn't know they didn't have to guess. They didn't know what design was. They thought it was pixel pushing, right? So I took an opportunity. I love telling this story. I hijacked their job, right? You know what? Don't worry about it. I will figure those things out to you and I'll come back to you. And they let me do it, right? But they just didn't even know what it was, where to start, how to do it. So I don't blame everybody. But then you have those people who are just like, oh, we know better. We don't need that. I had someone tell me, I think I told you a couple weeks ago, someone told me, she's like, well, you can't test it yet because we haven't built it. But what are you building? We don't know yet. Okay, baby, listen, like, wait, let me talk you through this. So, education and awareness.
This may sound like I don't know if this is a dumb question or not.
No such thing, Peter.
Okay, thank you. That makes me feel better. Can you concept test something that already exists? Like an actual working product or service or experience?
Okay, so I like showing this to my design thinking students. So vacuum cleaners, it's random, I know, but vacuum cleaners. The reason I picked this is because there was kind of this evolution of the vacuum cleaner, and they add a piece, they add a feature, functionality, people like it or they don't. Okay, great. They go to the next version. They either add it or they don't. And they're still constantly adding new features, new concepts to a thing that exists. You can do that. Or you can come back and say, I think once it's already launched, it's no longer a concept. It's probably some sort of a competitive experience where let's see what works, what doesn't work, and find something new. But a concept to me could be, we just want to try an idea, and you can do that at any point. Right? Like, does this thing work? There are quite a few websites today that have like hidden features, hidden concepts you don't even know are there, and they're just waiting to like push it out to a couple of people. Some version of A/B testing, right? Same thing.
Okay. What's the difference between concept testing and piloting?
So concept is this thing isn't real yet, right? And thanks to things like 3D printing, right? We can actually do a little bit more concept product testing, like when it's an actual thing. In the UI UX space, we have a clickable prototype, right? We have sketches, we have some sort of this is what this thing might look like. But it's not connected to anything. When it's a pilot, it's connected. It's fully integrated into your systems. It works, right? We just may not release it to everybody, but it's fully integrated, it's connected. So if I push the button, it's actually gonna do something. That's the difference between your concept and your pilot test.
What are the likely outcomes of not doing concept testing? What are the losses incurred from that?
The easiest one is you go to build it and you haven't properly defined your requirements. So if you just go from idea, let's put some things on the screen, you go and you start to so you have user stories, right? I don't know how people write user stories without users. It'll never make sense to me, but they go to start to build it without requirements or user stories, and they're just kind of making it up. So they can even get through that phase. But then you go to like maybe usability test it. I'm just going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say you didn't concept test. You went ahead and did usability testing, and you find out this is absolutely wrong. This is not what they needed. This is not what they asked for. It's not going to add value. It's not going to be a differentiator. Okay, well, now you've lost, and I'm not even being funny, you've lost 6, 8, 9, 10 months, right, on your production cycle, because now you have a choice. You either go back and do it right, or you continue forward with this thing that you know is going to be substandard. And why would you do that?
Interesting. Can you think of a, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but can you think of a generic product or something or a service that you looked at or you experienced and went, yeah, they didn't concept test this first?
I do. And I'm going to do this one gingerly. So we have actually tested a product where the idea was great. I can't tell you what it was because I think that would be telling. Anyway, the idea was absolutely great. It was, the owner wanted to simplify a process, and her the goal she was reaching for is it was supposed to be easy enough for her mom to do it. That was the standard. Okay. Came up with some ideas. I think there was a conversation around concept, but there wasn't actually anybody like touching it to see what it did.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Didn't do that part. So they just went on with development. Full speed ahead. So they brought it to us thinking that we were going to kind of give them like that sign off, right? It was a checkbox. Like,
it was a usability test, right?
Let's just do it so we can hear how awesome we were and that it's ready to go. And normally it doesn't hurt to tell people that they messed up, right? I actually enjoy that part a lot, right? I really enjoy that part.
You do.
I so enjoy that part. This time it hurt a little bit because I knew she had put a lot into it, right? But it was, you went from an idea, but you didn't vet that idea. You started to build it, and what you built was probably harder than most professionals can use, much less your mother. So it was like you miss all these opportunities, but at that point, what do you do?
Is that a function of somebody getting lost in their like living in their own vacuum? What is simple to them isn't simple to the user, and understanding the difference between those two things?
Once a quarter, every 6 months or so, maybe 3, 4 months, 6 months, doesn't matter. I go on LinkedIn and all I post is, you are not your user. That's literally the post, because people need to hear that. I understand you came in with a vision, but after a certain point, you know too much. And now your perspective is flawed because you're not thinking about the things people don't know. All you have is what you do know. So you're cheating yourself. You are not your user. And in that case, that product owner was not her user, and she missed the mark, right? And it happens to all of us, right? So even as a researcher now, I know there are things I just can't see anymore, because I'm like, well, they should know better, right? If it were me, I would do this, 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 or I make the connection in my head, and I don't need, like, I'm gonna miss something. And that's me accepting that about myself, and other people need to do the same. We are not our users. To a certain point, you know too much, and you're not gonna be the person to ask. You can't validate your own work. You have to go back to the person you designed it for. So in that instance, she should have gave it back to her mom. Can your mom actually do this? No? Then you missed the mark.
It was pretty complicated, yeah. Let's talk a little bit about concept testing in practice. What does it really look like? Are there different types of concept testing? How does it apply to digital experiences versus physical products? Things like that. Okay,
so I feel like I need a diagram. We need to work on that. We need a board.
Do we need to get you a
whiteboard,
okay.
So I can diagram. But so different types of concept testing. So we can do, I like testing at the wireframe level. Wireframe meaning it's the boxes, the shapes, but no color and nothing pretty. So one mistake I think a lot of designers make is they want to test something when it's beautiful, right? And it has all the colors and the perfect images. The problem is when you're getting feedback, sometimes you don't know if the user is appreciating the aesthetics of that design or the actual content in it. So I like to test at the wireframe level when it's just like, hey, we have an area here and we're thinking about this kind of content. You don't need to actually fill it in. It doesn't have to have any of the graphs or charts. It's literally like, hey, here's some boxes. This is what we think we might want here. Or what would you want here, right? We can ask the question both ways. So you can do it at the wireframe level, which is my preference. You can do a step up fidelity is, some sort of a design with actual content in it. When you start to have multiple designs, I like to do some sort of like compare them against each other. Again, I leave the option open that if I have 3 designs, ideally I want to walk out of the study with one, but that means I may take different pieces of each of these designs and then test another one. We can do this in the lab. So I can do an interview, put it in front of you, talk through it. That's one. Another one might be the design is a little bit further along. We basically know where most of the things are going, but we want to validate and make sure that the flow makes sense. So, Peter, we haven't talked about this. We don't talk about this one a lot.
Seems like a good time to
Oh
do
my
it.
goodness. Okay. So there are tools that have a first click study option. First click is here's your design, again, at any fidelity. It could be at any level. Here's your design. If you were going to do this thing, where would you go first? And you literally just get to validate where buttons are placed on the page. I like it because it's unmoderated, so I don't actually have to take time to do that. And then we can get a feel for where they're going and where they're not going. So that is another version of a concept test. The difference of doing it UI versus in a space. I think that might go back to being able to we love the 3D printer. So being able to say, hey, I may have this product, and you kind of build out what it might look like on a 3D printer and you hand it to them and how might you use it. That could also be a version of concept testing. So it's not real yet. I haven't invested a lot of money into it, but I'm exploring a bunch of different ideas.
If somebody's watching this and they're listening and they're like, that's all good, but I'm way further down the road in my process than this. I've already missed the boat on those things. What's the best thing they can do for themselves?
Call me and let's do a usability study. No, let's do a usability study. So if you are further along in fidelity, you have a clickable prototype, you didn't do any of this validation at all. The least you can do is, let's even go worst case scenario and they've already built it. Before it's launched, do a usability study, right? So probably around the same time that you're scheduling your QA, because QA is not usability testing. It's not the same thing. Same time you're scheduling your QA, go ahead and do some usability testing and put it in front of people. Because a couple of things that you may learn, you completely missed the mark, completely. And this is not going to add value. This is going to bomb. We won't talk about people who have suffered that the last week. This is going to bomb. This is not going to be what you thought it was going to be. Or, you know what? This is a really good start, but you have some gaps. So you either need to add contextual help. You might need to add a video on how to do these things because we know people are not going to know how to do it. You could figure out a way to kind of ease that burden of learning it. You could do that ahead of time. So, it's not lost, but definitely put it in front of somebody.
I probably should ask this question prior, but so the difference for most everybody, the difference between concept testing, running a pilot, and doing a usability test, is it all just a function of where you are in time, or are the actual methodologies greatly different from one to the other?
I think the reports are different. The methodology, how we do it, isn't always different on a UI level. So the way I run a concept test is going to be the way I typically run a usability test. Difference is my report is going to be different. A pilot is going to be significantly different, because it's not just a matter of me watching the person do it. Now I should be able to have analytics behind how long does it take to do it? Are there any performance issues or lags? Are there going to be API issues, right? I'm looking at it from a completely different lens when I'm at the pilot level than I am when I'm designing pre-launch.
What else about concept testing that we haven't talked about that you think we should touch on?
Maybe who's responsible for that? So ideally, I would say that your product owner, product manager should ask for concept testing, right? I wholeheartedly believe that. But who I put on the hook for that is going to be your designers. Because designers should say, you know what, I have a couple of ideas. We can go a couple of different ways, which is going to be the best for our user. So you have actually seen that in some design agencies. Design agencies have kind of taken on some of those responsibilities. Some of them we love because they come to us to do that, right? Because we can now offer this kind of third-party expert review of that process. So we can say it either works or it doesn't, right? And they trust us to do that. But it's really up to that design team, designer, organization to say, we know this is going to work. We know because we actually put it in front of people, and not take the do I want to say? Yeah, I'll say it because I said it before. They're not going to be arrogant and say, oh, I designed it perfectly. I don't need anybody to validate it, right? So I wholly put that responsibility on your designers.
Okay.
They should know better.
I wanted to give you one more opportunity to tell everybody your rule that you've been putting up on LinkedIn again.
You are not your user. You are not.
I love it. All right. Thank you, Adrienne. That was awesome. Once again, I appreciate it. Hope everybody got or learned something, or if you saw something in here that raised a question, please put it down below. We'd love to answer that for you. And if you got any ideas or questions about different topics that you'd like us to discuss here on Tangled, we'd love to hear from you as well on those too. Thank you, and we'll talk to you again next week or some other time on another episode of Untangled.